The enormous structure didn't look like it was faring very well, like water was rushing out of it too fast. The pool behind it was up to the edge, and water was flowing around both sides to the river below. She followed the trail of the normally greenish river, and it unfortunately passed right into where they were next to. Ashley looked down to the river's edge and saw that the water was too high. She did bird calculations in her head, which were very complex. Heavy-duty levels of bird arithmetic bubbled around her head, bringing her to the conclusion that the valley probably only had an hour or so. With that thought, there was more thunder and lightning and renewed showers starting to pound them. The warm and fluffy clouds were unable to pass by the mountain, and everything was coming down on this valley. So much rich oxygen from fresh plants mixed with clouds, and they got stronger and stronger. Ashley began to put together what was going on, so she scuttled her way back up to the front of the train as fast as she could, heading towards the sound of the powerful locomotive engines. 6. Abrupt beginning. Train yard, late morning, day 1. Ashley had got about halfway back up the cars and was starting to get tired when the train suddenly jerked to life, moving about an inch as each car tugged taut. Ashley had only been moving at a casual gait prior to conserve energy, and she hadn't predicted the large rail-riding vehicle chain would be leaving this early. She looked around, and not all of the farm animals were on yet. Humans were getting more and more on as fast as they could as the train began to move. Others were getting in their empty vehicles and driving ahead of the train, everyone in the same direction. A couple of large fuel trucks were moving in coordination with the rest of the convoy. They all quickly moved ahead of the slow but methodically moving train. Interspersed between every few trucks were people with guns, no doubt to protect everyone, and especially important farm animals, like Ashley. Ashley scuttled and hopped as fast as she could to the front of the train as it slowly crept up in speed. Her legs were burning, and she wasn't used to this much of a workout. Ashley usually moseyed around and occasionally only had to burst speed for a few seconds to get a bug that she wanted. This, though, was an enjoyable walk with some hops that turned into a jog and then a sprint and then a marathon. She didn't like it, and she knew she couldn't keep up. Ashley jumped and flapped her wings, extending them as far as they would go. This gave her legs a rest, but she couldn't keep it up for long. She eventually landed and ran for a few seconds, and then jumped and flapped as hard as she could again. Ashley put every ounce of strength into flapping her wings, and it carried her a little further, giving her little legs a rest. She was breathing hard, but she was determined to make it to the front of the train to the spot she had picked out. Ashley caught various conversations as she rocketed her way up the train. Some horses were talking about how fast they could run to each other. Other horses were talking about how they were glad the stupid humans brought them here. The alternative horse plan involved staying out in the rain and die just to spite the inferior idiots that occasionally rode on them. The speeding red chicken flew and hopped, past all of them, picking up speed. Some of her feathers were coming off at this point, showing blackened feathers underneath. Ashley put more energy into flapping, pushing herself to the limit, and then she felt her left wing snap. Ashley overcompensated with her right wing to prevent slamming hard into the top of the train. Her right wing snapped as well, feeling not as if it was breaking, but rather finally popping into place. Cartilage cracked and popped as her wings reformed, expanding out a few more inches to each side. All of the sudden feeling felt right, as if she was supposed to be traveling this way all along. Ashley felt the airflow in her face, and the driving rain threatened to pile-drive her into the roofs of the train car she was running across. The rain helped her feel the difference in pressure, and she felt the resistance in her wings. Ashley was solely focused on getting to the front of the train, and threw all inhibitions out the window. She pushed with every ounce of her being. Cart by cart, she would find that limit and push past it. She flapped and hopped and flapped and hopped more. Then with a mighty hop, harder than she'd ever pushed, Ashley's back popped. She grew a few inches, stretching out. Then at this new angle, Ashley took a deep breath, her lungs feeling freer than they ever had, and then she leapt. Ashley catapulted into the air at a new angle, and it was like the whole world suddenly clicked. She took in deep breaths and pushed, briefly hearing the sheep trying to decide which they would follow that day, and not coming to any solid conclusion. She flapped and jumped harder and harder, getting used to her new range of motion. Then all of a sudden she straightened out and didn't need to land anymore. Ashley didn't even have time to think. She pushed with everything she had and propelled herself all the way to the front of the cars, driving through the rain. The train has picked up speed and is moving at a fairly substantial speed as far as trains were concerned. Further ahead, the train took a corner and Ashley spotted a cart with a big machine. Exhausted, lightheaded, and gasping for breath, she made a final push and crashed into the cart. Thankfully, the large machine stopped her from flying out the other side. Ashley felt several bones crunch, but was able to crawl onto a comfy seat where she could see out. Deep gasping breaths and brain swimming, she looked around and into the valley. Hopefully nobody saw her, as she was sure that maneuver she performed was anything but flattering. Behind her, towards the end of the train, her bird version of complex mathematical predictions came true, and the dam began to give way. 7. On the move. Train southbound, late morning, day 1. Ashley shuffled her bum around a little bit and decided to herself she was quite comfortable. She could see out the cart from here and realized she couldn't see the earth anymore. Where there was supposed to be dirt, all she could see was water and the tips of grass. It wouldn't affect the train, though, she thought. They were on railroad tracks, and the railroad ties were on gravel that was a bit higher than the dirt. The gravel was still dry. They chugged along, and Ashley peacefully let her eyes rest, her body exhausted from her first real flight. Ashley rested for a little bit, listening to the clickety-clack of the trains and the pitter-patter of the rain. She imagined all the other chickens clucking around and waiting for their own breakfast. They were no doubt talking smack about her right now, reassuring each other how stupid she was for leaving and being different. "You're different and dumb," the chickens would always say. Then the rooster would pop in, screaming to all of them how nobody had found a way to kill him yet, and that he ain't never gonna die. Ashley never really understood why she was different from them. They were all the same shape and liked the same food. Ashley talked a little different and was a different color, but that was about it. She didn't hate them for being the same color. She just didn't understand why they had to be so mean and exclusive. Ashley thought about it with her eyes closed, stretched a bit, and then scrunched up in a comfortable ball. They didn't hate me because I was different. They hated me because they needed someone to pick on to survive. Ashley was right. In little ways, all the chickens were different. To survive, though, they all had to ignore those things and pick on someone else so that they wouldn't get picked on. The reality was that they were all the same, and yet different. That's how hierarchy was established. It wasn't fun, but that's the way it was. Ashley thought more. Worthless creatures survive by finding what's different. Smart creatures survive by finding commonality. Ashley was right again. All of the other animals survived because they huddled together when the time was right instead of placing blame. All of the animals made it besides the chickens from her coop. Ashley figured this was because the chickens would be so divisive they wouldn't cooperate enough to get in their cages to be rescued. First, they would argue who had to be in charge. Then there'd be a committee about who should go first and what order they should go in, always with a stupid pecking order. Ashley recalled a mental note that even the pigs had several carts to themselves and got rescued in time. Pigs have really solid politics, Ashley thought to herself. They establish hierarchy pretty much right away and follow those people no matter what. Even if they divide into multiple factions, they are still very smart and know to stick together. Chicken alliances are changing every day because they can never stop talking trash about each other. But there were so many better, more interesting things to do, and Ashley knew that. That's why she was on a train out of town while they were all going to be stranded in a giant flooding basin with nobody to babysit them anymore. Ashley nodded to herself in silence. She didn't need a babysitter. She was her own bird. Ashley rested a while, content with herself, and then opened her eyes again. She looked out across the tracks as the train clacked along therapeutically. Much to her dismay, the water had reached the gravel. They were still in the basin, and it was a long and slow stretch to get out. It looked like slowly but surely they were getting up on an incline, though. They were still in the basin, but the rail's foundation was slowly being built up underneath them. It wasn't a moment too soon as Ashley heard a horrible noise far off in the distance. It sounded like an earthquake was going off. She remembered little earthquakes from before, and this sounded like a huge earthquake. It sounded like the whole valley was crashing down. The train let out several deep hoots with its horn as it tried to reach its maximum speed. The water rushed in every direction, the local river beyond capacity, Despite volunteer engineers struggling to manage the aging dam's flow, there was simply no way for it to function properly anymore, with the tremendous ice melt and every 10-year or so flood. Especially not now, after a 3-day non-stop rainstorm happening at exactly the same time. A portion of that water, due to the law of physics, had to rush in the direction of the train. Ashley saw several feet of water go whooshing by them as they started getting higher and higher on the gravel foundation from the tracks were on. Soon they were 7 feet up or so, having got by all the overpasses and underpasses of their own. Ashley imagined the cars behind them having water up to the train tracks themselves, then the train barely getting up in time as the water exponentially increased. The water didn't stop there, though. It kept rising. As the train slowly egressed out of the basin, the water kept rising, as if it was chasing the last vestige of civilization out, like it was trying to reclaim its territory. Slowly the elevation of the train rose as it pulled out of the valley, as each quarter mile of land they passed through became new beachfront property. The rain continued pouring, and the water continued flooding out of the old lake it was in, emptying into the new lake. Condos and manufacturing all long since gone, and the farmers and their flocks barely safe out of the area. The water was still creeping, but it wasn't as fast. All of the areas the train passed were empty of people, farm equipment, and their respective farm animals. Ashley thought this was very smart for everyone to get out, and it seemed like they did a good job. They did, after all, have slightly more time to prepare. Before long, after Ashley noticed there was still a lot of water, but that it was going in the other direction. All of the water in the area was collecting into the basin, filling it up even higher. The train moved on.